Why, hello everybody. Welcome back to Classical Homesteading Practices. Today, we are going to be talking about the last two basic skills that I feel like is going to round you out for your homesteading practice, and that is going to be sewing and carpentry. Now, I would like to talk about sewing first, and I promise we won't delve too deeply into it just because I will be making each individual episode deep diving into the basic skills that I've talked about in part 1 and now part 2. But the reason why we're talking about them now in a smaller format is because I feel like it is very necessary to have this discussion. It is very important for people to understand that when you want to become independent or a homesteader where you are more self-sufficient, these skills can really make a difference when it comes to, in the long term, knowing what to do on your homestead and also taking advantage of the materials and the resources that are around you and putting them into your everyday life. So, in the first part, I would like to say if you want to learn more about gardening, cooking, and livestock husbandry, definitely go back and listen to that. It is independent from this one, so you can listen to this first and then go over to that one. But again, let's get into sewing first. So the reason why I believe sewing is such a humongous resource to have and a skill to have, especially on a homestead, is because being able to make your own clothing, especially in a sturdier way, was one of the biggest resources that people in a pioneer and or any other homesteading fashion before the 21st century is how we made our clothing. It was the cheapest way to make our clothing, and it was also the sturdiest way to make our clothing. Compared to now with fast fashion and other ways that you can get it, the only sturdy piece of clothing that I have ever been able to find that literally lasts me more than 5 months, maybe a year, is a garment that was made by hand, or a garment that was made at least 15 to 20 years prior than today. And it was very well taken care of. Actually, no, because it was made in the 80s, it would be 40 years. Sometimes I forget how old garments have been and how long, well, actually, short ago it was when we were actually making our own clothing. You have to think about it. Even back in the 80s, people were making their own clothing instead of going to the store and purchasing it. And the reason for that is because, again, clothes that were made back then were either not massively produced like today, or they were hand done. Now, in boutiques, in vintage clothing places, they are more handmade now instead of going to Walmart or Fred Meyer's or any big box store like that. So the price is going to be a lot higher because you're also paying for the labor. But when you do it yourself and you have learned the techniques involved, you are the one who is going to be doing your exact measurements. You are making it for yourself, and it's going to last you, depending on the material you use. It could last you a year, 5 years, 10 years, or an entire lifetime. And the reason why I emphasize that is because if you think back 400 years ago, or let's do it a little bit earlier and say even 200 years ago, or 100 years ago even, that's what you had to do. Because cloth was so expensive, you had to learn a way to sew in order to keep your clothes living as long as you did, because it was so expensive and time-consuming to make them. Now that we have, polyester and rayon and sewing machines, it is a lot easier and a lot more accessible for us to use these materials and this way to make clothing. But back in the day, you would use cotton, linen, hemp, wool, all these natural materials that were made to specifically last a long period of time, because over hundreds, even thousands of years, these materials have been skillfully learned, and the knowledge of keeping clothes has been passed down in books, in tellings, and just through the generations been made more and more accessible to us. And it's something that we have forgotten in time. I really do believe that this skill has been put aside, again, because clothing is more accessible to us. And I would really like to talk about bringing it back, because if we don't, then how are we ever going to learn the skill again? What if it ever gets lost to us? What if something horrible happens and, we aren't able to take it upon ourselves to have fast fashion anymore? Well, you need to be able to have the skills to do it. Or if you decide to live as a homesteader, being able to make your own clothes is just nicer, and you get better quality. So, the basic things that I believe people should learn when it comes to sewing is 3 basic stitches. One is a hemming stitch, or a whip stitch, or a felling stitch. Those are the different names for this one, where you are folding the edges of your garment and then using a diagonal stitch in order to nicely keep it in place. The other stitch is a back stitch, which is putting a stitch on top of a stitch, basically. And I would highly recommend looking these up. There's one person, her name is Bernadette Banner, who does a fantastic job on YouTube of showing you these stitches. And the last one is the basting stitch, which basically, if you like to do ruffles or anything nice, it is a stitch that helps you weave in and out of the fabric with a basic piece of sewing string. And what that does is just connect the 2 pieces together that are not going to be put any strain onto them. So your felling or whip stitch, which puts hems together or hems your pieces, a back stitch, which is for the sturdier pieces that need to be put together, that is going to have a lot of strain put on it, so seams in general, or pieces like underwear, the side, the hip sides, or jeans, any kind of seam area on the sides that is going to have a lot of weight or strain put on it. That's what you use a back stitch for. And then your basting stitch, which is going to just put everything together and that doesn't have a lot of strain on it. Oh, and the last extra, we'll do a bonus one, is going to be your zigzag stitch, which is very helpful when wanting to do a stretch stitch. A stretch stitch is very important because even though cotton, linen, all these basic fabrics don't have as much stretch as a polyester or an elastic would, they still have a natural stretch to them, especially when you hold the piece of fabric diagonally and stretch it out. It's going to have some give. And if you want to have that in your garment, you can do that and have that by putting in a stretch stitch, which is a very easy Z or zigzag stitch. I would heavily recommend going up and looking online. Basically just Google a stretch stitch. I'm saying it because if I don't say it clearly like that, it will blur together, so apologies. But look that up, watch a video, do it yourself together, and just take your time to learn these, because for me personally, it doesn't take a lot of time after you learn the stitch to get some speed with it if you're hand stitching. And I think the biggest thing about this conversation isn't necessarily knowing how to machine stitch, but to hand stitch. And again, the reason for that is, one, yes, it does take a lot of time to do so. But It is a skill that you can have with you for the rest of your life. You can keep a small amount of materials on hand, either in a bag, in a coat pocket, anything. So if you have a rip, a tear, something going wrong with your clothes that you have right now, you are able to sew it up properly and you know what you're doing. You're able to patch your clothing and you know what you're doing. And that is so important for everyday mending. And again, if you don't want to go off the deep end and make your own clothes or use fibers and wool in your everyday clothing, if that doesn't sound like something for you, learning this skill is still very important because you're able to mend the clothes you have. So instead of going out and purchasing new, that favorite blouse, that favorite pair of jeans that's worn in the side or the crotch, you're able to mend it still. You're able to use them for a longer period of time than, the 6 months that it took you to put that hole in it for the first place. Go ahead and try mending it first and see how it works for you. Learning this makes it easier for your life at the end of the day. So, 2 things for you to think about when it comes to sewing skills is you can make your own clothes or you can mend the ones that you have. So, in my opinion, as a homesteader and in everyday life, it's very important to have the skill. And I would love for you to think about it and see how you feel about it afterwards when you give it a little bit of time. Now, the things that you need when it comes to sewing is a larger gauge needle, a smaller gauge needle, understanding the difference between the two of them in their application because needles do have their own application. One is used for cloth, one's used for ribbon, lace, and so forth. You will also need some good string. You're going to need to understand what kind of thread gauge it's going to be, and you're going to need to see if it's for buttons, for jeans, denim, polyester, what kind of material goes with this kind of thread. And yes, I know it's so crazy to think that there is such a thing as matching your thread to your fabric, but it's a very necessary thing for you to do in order to have a proper sewing experience. So, needle, thread, and of course your thimble. And the reason why people don't think about the thimble is because nobody has actually taught you how to have a thimble. And hand sewing thimbles are so important because you are going to be using your middle finger a lot for it. And having a thimble on your middle finger is going to keep it from being poked raw while you're sewing. So keep a thimble. And then, at the very least, make sure that you have an iron because you will want to iron your seams. You're going to want to iron your fabric. So, let's see. A needle, thread, thimble, and an iron. Oh, and of course, a little tomato push pin. And then, of course, your push pins on top of it. So 7 things that you're going to need in order to sew by hand nicely. And of course, just practice. Practicing is going to make things so much easier over a period of time, and learning this on top of it will make everything just go smoother and smoother. Don't try and pick up a hard thing first. Go ahead, make it easy for you so you're not frustrated learning about these kinds of things. So go ahead and knit a scarf, a handkerchief, mend your jeans, try and figure out why you have a tear in your shirt and fix that tear. Don't go and start with making a shirt or making a cape, overall something heavy and hard for you, because you'll just get discouraged and frustrated. So, now that we've talked about sewing for the last almost 15 minutes, I bet that was so much fun for you. Let's go over to carpentry. So, the reason why I believe carpentry is necessary for homesteading and for normal day life is because once you figure out how to build things with your hands, 1, it's addictive and you're going to love it. And 2, you will be able to look at anything in the world around you and say, I think I could actually build that, or I can make that. And especially in certain areas of the United States and even the world, wood is very inexpensive, or certain materials are very inexpensive, where you are able to build something much more cheaply than purchasing it. And I know that's a crazy thing to think about, especially because there are really nice things that you could go to Walmart for, or Fred Meyer's, or your general box store and be like, hey, let's just grab this and go. And yes, it is so much simpler to do that. But when you put the time and effort into building a piece of furniture, or in my case, a garden box, the love and the happiness that you get out of that tangible goal that you've built into, it makes you happier as a person. And again, it makes your pocketbook a little bit fatter. So, my biggest recommendation to you is to get a square. It's called a speed square, which is actually a triangle, so it's a little misleading. But when you go to your hardware store and you don't know what it looks like, you can ask the attendant for a speed square. And this is going to help you with angles, and it's going to help you with drawing straight lines. And that is very important when it comes to carpentry, because most of the time, even when you're doing normal squares, you're going to need a straight line in order to do it, or when you put your pieces together, it's going to look wonky, or it's not going to match up straight because it's not flush together. So make sure to have a speed square handy. Make sure to have, I know nobody thinks about it until they lose it, a measuring tape. Make sure it's a clip-on so you can put it on your person or in your pocket at all the times. Make sure you have a pencil or a pen. I preferably have both of them with me. And then understand what kind of wood that you want to work with. And I'm talking about pine, spruce, oak. Learn all of the names and learn what goes behind it. You're going to have hardwoods. You're going to have softwoods. You're going to have things that smell amazing or things that turn color to what you want. So you'll have the ability to have function versus decor beauty. And for your purpose of either making a table or making a greenhouse, you use those woods in function with it. So, learning what kind of woods, what kind of tools, and what kind of screws and nails go with a certain project is going to help you over a very long period of time. And just being able to have that knowledge alone will put you miles ahead of anybody else trying to do a project. So, learn your materials. That is another big skill in carpentry that you need to learn. And also, one big thing that I had to learn when I myself was starting out is pick one tool for cutting. Learn it to the best of your abilities before going forward, because you can do almost anything with one piece of equipment, and that is a circular saw. You do not need a miter saw. You do not need a table saw. You can just use a circular saw for cutting almost anything. And that was the coolest thing in my life when I first learned about it, because having one tool for every application was the most inexpensive thing for me to learn, and just keeping care of it and taking really good care of this tool for years not only saved me thousands of dollars, but made me very well equipped in using this tool for the rest of my life. So, the one tool that you personally need to do any project, I believe, is a circular saw. And again, because you can cut 2x4s, 4x4s, 2x6s, plywood, anything that you need as a smaller structure, from going to greenhouses to chicken coops to garden boxes, you can use a circular saw for all of it. You can even cut angles with this, either manually, or it has a oh goodness, what is it called on the side? It has an angle adjuster on the side of it where you are able to get the proper angle that you want for the cut on your wood, which is just fantastic because sometimes you're not going to feel comfortable with making a cut just by eyeballing it. But another thing that goes hand in hand with it, once you have your speed square, you can draw an angle, take your cutter, and then just mark it out very well, very easily. And you have your piece of wood ready to go. Another big thing that you need to learn when it comes to carpentry is following a plan. Go ahead and get a blueprint. Don't eyeball it. That was my biggest mistake when it came to making my chicken coop for the first time. And I had to do it twice. So the first time that I made a chicken coop, it was awful. It was something that was rickety, and without plywood, the base structure of it was rickety and would have fallen over if the wind caught it easily enough. So, by the strength of my husband's words, I decided to go and find somebody who had a decent plan for a chicken coop, and I followed it to the T. I got everything that I needed for this build, and I followed each and every direction that I could. And the reason being is once you learn why something is built a certain way, it sticks with you. And then after you learn it properly, you're able to use the foundations of those plans in other builds. It is hands-on learning for you to follow a plan so you can use the applications in later builds, if that makes sense to you. So basically what you're doing with blueprints with any kind of design plan is filling your toolbox of knowledge so you can take those ideas and bits and pieces of a blueprint and make your own designs later. See what is stable, what works, what doesn't work, and tweak it to your advantage when you get good enough and you are comfortable enough with your tools in order to do this. So, let's make sure that I laid out everything. Talked about the tools that you'll need, which is a circular saw. You're going to need a measure tape and a speed square, a pencil and pen. For your skills, you should also learn how to fully use your one piece of equipment, which will save you time and money and make you fully skilled in that one tool. You should also do blueprints when you are first working out your skills, so you can learn the basics through doing it and also seeing it with the blueprint, and then you can finagle around what you want in later projects. I think that's about it when it comes to carpentry. Wait, and as another skill for carpentry, the basic piece to all of this is learning your materials and what should go into your project, what you should use for a certain project, whether it be a table or an outdoor piece of equipment like a sawhorse, a garden box, a greenhouse, or a chicken coop. All right. I think I've given you the basic knowledge and understanding of what goes into sewing and carpentry and how to start from there. And if not, let me know. Give me a message and see if there's anything else that you want to learn or you would like me to clarify in this. I would love to hear how you have been doing with your homesteading and your skill propagating experiences, whether there is something more that you would like to put in on this and what has worked well for you in all of your journeys, or if there's something from a new person or a person who would like to learn something in a new area, just give me a ring. Let me know. There is a voice messenger app. Push it. Let it rip. All right, everybody. This is Classical Homesteading Practices. Thank you for being here with me today, and I will see you later. Bye.